The sun had barely climbed over the rooftops of Willow Creek, a quiet, suburban neighborhood where every lawn was trimmed perfectly and every mailbox looked the same. Birds chirped lazily, sprinklers ticked rhythmically, and the morning air smelled of dew and freshly cut grass. It was a picture-perfect morning, at least until one phone call changed everything. Before I tell you what happened, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. I really want to know how far my story travels. On Maple Street, two 10-year-old twin boys, Jaden and Jordan, were setting up a lemonade stand outside their driveway. It was summer break, and they'd spent the previous night making bright yellow posters that said, "Fresh lemonade, $1 a cup," taped to a wobbly card table. They laughed as they poured their first pitcher, clumsy but excited. The smell of sugar and citrus filled the air. Across the street, Mrs. Carolyn White, a woman in her late 50s, peeked from behind her white lace curtains. She'd lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years. And though she called herself friendly, her neighbors often described her differently: watchful, judgmental, and quick to dial the authorities when something didn't fit her view of normal. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted the twins. "New kids again," she muttered under her breath. "Where are their parents? Probably causing trouble." She squinted harder, as if innocence could somehow be suspicious. Meanwhile, Jaden and Jordan were full of joy. A delivery man on a bike stopped, bought 2 cups, and complimented their effort. "Good job, boys. Keep it up," he said with a grin. They smiled wide, proud that their little business was working. But across the street, Mrs. White's paranoia grew. She reached for her phone. "Yes, hello? I'd like to report 2 minors loitering near Maple Street," she said sharply. They look suspicious. I don't know if they live here." The dispatcher tried to calm her down, asking if the children were causing harm. "They're just standing there," Mrs. White insisted. "But I've never seen them before. They could be up to something." 15 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled down Maple Street. Its engine hummed low, but to the twins, the sight was exciting. They thought maybe the officer wanted lemonade too. Jaden waved. "Hey, officer! Lemonade, $1. The officer, Deputy Harris, stepped out slowly, one hand on his belt. "Hey there, kids," he said cautiously. "Mind telling me what you're doing here?" Jordan blinked. Selling lemonade, sir." The deputy's expression stayed stiff. "You live here?" Jaden pointed proudly. "Yes, sir. That's our house." "Right there." Mrs. White stepped out of her yard, pretending surprise. "Oh, officer, I didn't mean to cause a scene, but I was just worried. You never know these days." She forced a shaky laugh. "They just didn't look familiar." Deputy Harris frowned slightly, glancing at the neat house behind the boys. The porch light was still on, the lawn freshly cut. "Ma'am, they said this is their home." "Well," she said, folding her arms, "you can't be too sure. Maybe they're visiting unsupervised?" The twins looked at each other, confusion creeping into their eyes. "Sir, our mom's inside," Jordan said softly. "She's on a work call. We can get her." But the deputy hesitated. Maybe it was the nervousness in Mrs. White's tone. Maybe it was habit. But he radioed in, calling for backup, just to confirm the situation. A second car arrived moments later. 2 more officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. The neighborhood began to stir. Curtains shifted, dogs barked, and whispers traveled faster than the wind. Jaden's throat went dry. "We didn't do anything," he said, voice trembling. "We just wanted to make some money for our baseball team." One officer sighed. "Son, just stay calm. We're just checking things out." Mrs. White, however, wore a faint smirk of satisfaction. "See? I told you something wasn't right," she whispered to herself. Then the front door of the twins' house swung open. A tall woman stepped out, wearing a navy blue blouse tucked neatly into black trousers. Her hair was tied back, her walk calm but purposeful. The officers turned their heads and froze. Chief Angela Brooks. Every cop in the precinct knew her name. She was their commanding officer. Her eyes darted from her terrified sons to the 3 officers standing on her lawn. "Is there a reason," she said coolly, "that armed units are surrounding my children?" Silence fell. Even the sprinklers seemed to stop ticking. Mrs. White blinked in disbelief. "Wait, you're their mother?" Chief Brooks gave her a long, steady look that could cut glass. "Yes, I'm their mother, and the chief of police for this district." The deputy's hand dropped away from his holster as he swallowed hard. "Chief, we received a call from a concerned neighbor about 2 minors possibly trespassing." "On their own property?" she interrupted sharply. Mrs. White stammered, I just didn't recognize them." Angela's voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of authority. "Maybe that's because you never cared to look close enough." For a few long seconds, no one spoke. The air grew heavy. Jaden and Jordan clutched the edge of their lemonade table, unsure whether to cry or smile. Finally, Angela turned to her boys, her tone softening. "Go inside, boys. I'll handle this." They obeyed quietly, stepping back toward the house. Then Angela faced the officers again. "Next time you get a call like this," she said coldly, "use judgment before backup. Because sometimes the threat isn't who you think it is." The officers nodded awkwardly, muttering apologies before retreating toward their cars. Mrs. White stood frozen, color draining from her face. Angela took one step closer. "And as for you," she said evenly, "I suggest you learn what real danger looks like. Because it's not 2 kids selling lemonade." Without another word, the chief turned, went inside, and closed the door behind her. Outside, Mrs. White stood alone on the sidewalk, the weight of shame settling in heavier than the morning heat. But the story didn't end there. The afternoon sun baked the sidewalks of Willow Creek, making the asphalt shimmer like a dark river. But inside every house, behind every drawn curtain, a story was spreading, and it carried more heat than the weather ever could. By lunchtime, everyone in the neighborhood had heard that Mrs. White had called the cops on the Brooks twins, and that the twins' mother was the chief of police herself. Phones buzzed, text messages flew, and whispers curled through the neighborhood like smoke. "Did you hear what happened to Carolyn White?" one woman murmured at the local grocery store. "She called the cops on those kids," said another. "And it turned out their mom runs the whole department." "No way. I swear." She nearly fainted when the chief showed up. By evening, Carolyn couldn't even step onto her porch without feeling eyes on her. The same neighbors who used to greet her with polite smiles now crossed the street instead. The kids who used to wave from their bikes now pedaled faster when they passed her house. But deep down, she didn't feel guilty. Not yet. In her mind, she was just being cautious. That's what she told herself over and over again. Inside her tidy living room, she sat stiffly in an armchair, sipping lukewarm tea, replaying the incident in her head. "I didn't mean any harm," she muttered aloud. "Anyone would have done the same thing. 2 kids out alone, who knows what's going on?" But her cat, perched on the windowsill, offered no agreement. The silence was sharp. Across the street, the Brooks family was having dinner. The twins sat quietly, pushing their mashed potatoes around their plates. Usually, their evenings were filled with laughter and chatter about school or baseball practice. But tonight, the air was heavy. Chief Angela Brooks looked at her sons, her heart twisting. "You boys okay?" Jordan nodded weakly. "We didn't do anything wrong, Mom. Why'd she call the police on us?" Angela took a slow breath. "Because sometimes people see what they expect to see instead of what's really there." Jaden frowned. "But you're the chief. Doesn't that mean they have to listen to you?" Angela smiled sadly. "They do, but that doesn't mean they always understand." She wanted to tell them the truth, that she'd worked her whole career trying to change how people like Mrs. White saw families like hers. "But how do you explain prejudice to 10-year-olds who still believe the world is mostly fair?" She reached across the table and squeezed their hands. You both did nothing wrong. Remember that. Never let someone else's fear make you doubt who you are. That night, after tucking them into bed, Angela sat alone in her study. The soft hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence. On her desk sat a photo of her late husband, Marcus Brooks, also a police officer, killed in the line of duty years ago. She whispered to the photo, "You'd have been proud of them today." Her phone buzzed, a message from her deputy. "Chief, about the incident earlier, local press caught wind. They're asking for a statement." Angela closed her eyes and sighed. Of course they were. In today's world, every small-town misunderstanding could explode into a headline. She typed back carefully, "No statement yet. Let's see how the community responds." But deep down, she knew the story was already out of her hands. The next morning, Carolyn White woke to a knock on her door. When she opened it, she froze. Standing there was Angela Brooks, wearing a plain blue blazer instead of her uniform. No badge, no formality, just a calm expression that carried quiet authority. "Mrs. White," Angela said evenly. "May I come in?" Carolyn hesitated. Yes, of course." She led her inside, heart pounding. Angela looked around the neat living room, noticing the old family portraits and the framed church certificates. Everything screamed order and propriety. "I didn't expect you," Carolyn said nervously. "If this is about yesterday—" "It is," Angela interrupted softly. "But I'm not here as your police chief. I'm here as a mother." Carolyn's throat tightened. "I didn't mean—" Angela raised a hand. "I know. You thought you were protecting the neighborhood." She paused, then leaned forward slightly. "But what I want you to understand is that my boys were protecting something too. Their childhood. Something that moments like yesterday can take away." Carolyn swallowed hard, guilt flickering at last behind her eyes. She started, her voice cracking. "They didn't look familiar." "I panicked," Angela nodded slowly. "Fear can make people do a lot of things, but it doesn't excuse them." Carolyn looked down at her trembling hands. "I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't think." Angela's tone softened slightly. "That's the problem, Mrs. White. Too many people don't think. They just react." For a few long seconds, the two women sat in silence. Then Angela stood up. "I'm not here to embarrass you. I came because I believe lessons mean more when they're personal. My boys were terrified. I don't want that fear to spread. I want understanding." Carolyn's eyes glistened. "You're right. I was wrong. I'll apologize to them." Angela gave a faint smile. "That's between you and your conscience. Just make sure it's sincere." She turned to leave, but before stepping out, she looked back. "And Mrs. White, next time you see something you don't recognize, maybe try introducing yourself before you call for backup." The door closed gently behind her, leaving Carolyn alone with her thoughts. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the twins set up their lemonade stand again. They hesitated at first, afraid the same thing might happen, but Angela encouraged them. "You can't let one bad moment steal your courage," she said. When they carried out the table, a few neighbors stopped by, not just to buy lemonade, but to show support. One man dropped a $20 bill in the jar and said, "Heard what happened. You boys keep your heads high." The twins smiled, a little shy, but stronger than before. From across the street, Mrs. White watched quietly. After a long pause, she walked over, her hands clasped nervously. "Boys," she began softly, "I owe you both an apology." Jaden and Jordan exchanged uncertain looks. "I made a mistake," she said. "You didn't deserve what happened." "I hope you'll forgive me." Jordan nodded slowly. "It's okay, ma'am. We just wanted to sell lemonade." Mrs. White forced a small smile. "Then let me be your first customer today." She dropped $1 in the jar, took a cup, and walked away, her eyes glassy, her pride bruised but her conscience lighter. Angela watched from the window, a quiet relief spreading across her face. Maybe, just maybe, things were beginning to change. But as night fell, and the news van parked at the end of the street, cameras ready, reporters whispering about the viral story from Maple Street, Angela realized something deeper. This wasn't just a neighborhood incident anymore. It was becoming a story the whole country would talk about. By the next morning, Willow Creek didn't feel like a quiet suburban neighborhood anymore. News vans lined the street, camera tripods cluttered the sidewalks, and microphones waved in the air like flags of chaos. What had started as a simple misunderstanding between a neighbor and two children had turned into a nationwide headline. On every news channel, every social media feed, the story was everywhere. White neighbor calls police on black children. Police chief responds in person. Lemonade stand incident sparks debate over racial profiling in suburbia. Clips of the police cars outside the Brooks home played on repeat, recorded secretly by curious neighbors. The image of Chief Angela Brooks standing on her front lawn, confronting her own officers, spread like wildfire. And as stories go viral often do, truth started to twist. Some online voices called Angela a hero, a mother who stood up for her sons and for justice. Others called her overreactive, saying she used her position to intimidate a civilian. Angela didn't care about the noise. At least, that's what she told herself. But as she sat in her office at the precinct, staring at her computer screen filled with emails, she knew things were getting complicated. One message caught her eye. Chief Brooks, as someone who looks up to you, I just want to say thank you for standing your ground. You made a lot of kids feel seen today. Another read, you're the problem. This kind of race-baiting ruins communities. Angela exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. For years, she'd worked to keep her personal life out of the spotlight. Now, her family's pain was being debated by strangers. Deputy Harris knocked on her door. Chief, the mayor's online too. He wants to know if you're issuing an official statement. Angela hesitated. Not yet. If I speak too soon, it looks emotional. Too late, it looks defensive. He nodded, understanding her careful balance. Also, the kids' school called. They've been getting media requests too. Angela's eyes darkened. They're 10 years old. This should have never reached them. Across town, Mrs. White sat in her kitchen, clutching a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. Her landline had been ringing non-stop. Reporters, local activists, even strangers from other states wanting to hear her side. But there was no side to tell that didn't make her sound small. She watched the television where her own face flashed briefly, captured in a blurred photo taken by a neighbor. Beneath it, bold letters read, "The caller, concerned citizen or hidden racist." Her stomach knotted. That's not who I am, she whispered to herself. But deep down, she wasn't sure anymore. She thought about Angela's words. Maybe that's because you never cared to look close enough. They echoed in her mind like a haunting. For the first time, Carolyn saw herself from the outside, standing on her porch, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at two innocent boys. She hadn't seen children that morning. She'd seen assumptions. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from the Willow Creek Neighborhood Association. Carolyn, we think it's best you step down from your position for now. The community needs to cool off. She closed her eyes. The world she thought she belonged to was crumbling piece by piece. Meanwhile, the Brooks twins were trying to return to normal life, but normal had changed. At school, kids whispered in the hallways. Some came up to them saying, "Hey, we saw you on TikTok." Others just stared. Jaden tried to ignore it, but Jordan struggled. He came home that afternoon quiet and withdrawn. Angela found him sitting in his room, clutching his baseball glove but not throwing it like he usually did. "Talk to me." she said softly. He looked up, eyes wet. Why do people hate us, Mom? We didn't do anything. Her heart broke. She knelt beside him. They don't hate you, sweetheart. Some people are just afraid of what they don't understand. He shook his head. But you said Mrs. White said sorry. Isn't that supposed to make it stop? Angela smiled sadly. An apology is just a beginning, not an ending. Change takes time. He leaned into her hug, whispering, I wish Dad was here. Her throat tightened. Me too, she said, fighting back tears. That evening, Angela sat alone on her porch. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the street. Reporters were gone now, but the echoes of the day lingered. Across the road, she saw movement. Mrs. White stood on her own porch, holding something in her hands, a small paper bag. Hesitantly, she crossed the street. Chief Brooks, she began, her voice soft, almost trembling. I know you probably don't want to see me, but I made these. She held out the bag, homemade cookies. Angela hesitated. You didn't have to. I know, Mrs. White said quickly. But I wanted to. I don't know how to make things right, but I'm trying. Angela accepted the bag, looking her in the eyes. Trying is a start, but real change happens when you keep going, even when nobody's watching. Carolyn nodded, tears filling her eyes. I understand. As she turned to leave, Angela called out softly, Mrs. White. She stopped. You could come by sometime. Maybe have lemonade with the boys. Let them see you as a neighbor, not a stranger. Carolyn blinked in surprise. You'd be okay with that? Angela smiled faintly. If we all wait for someone else to start healing, nobody ever will. For the first time, Mrs. White smiled back. Small, uncertain, but real. Later that night, Angela scrolled through her phone, finding a post that had gone viral. The chief who stood up and the neighbor who learned. The post showed a photo of her twins smiling behind their lemonade stand, with Mrs. White standing beside them, holding a cup. In the comments below, hundreds of people wrote messages like, This gives me hope. Proof that understanding can grow anywhere. Respect to that mom and those kids. Angela felt a quiet warmth spread through her chest. Her boys were asleep upstairs, unaware that their small act of courage had started something bigger than themselves. A conversation, a reflection, maybe even a movement. She looked out the window one last time before bed. Across the street, the porch light on Mrs. White's house was still on, not as a symbol of watchfulness anymore, but perhaps as a sign of awakening. But the story wasn't over. Because the next day, a letter arrived at the precinct addressed to Chief Angela Brooks, handwritten, sealed with no return address. Inside it were just a few words. Your courage reminded me of who I used to be. I'm coming to Willow Creek. I owe you a story. Angela frowned, reading it twice. Something about those words felt personal, as if a door from her past had just been cracked open. And she didn't yet know that what was coming next would change everything again. The station was quieter now, but tension hung in the air like static before a storm. The twins sat side by side on a cold bench, swinging their legs nervously. Their eyes darted between the clock on the wall and the frosted window, where police lights occasionally flashed faint red and blue through the glass. Chief Angela Davis stood in her office, the door half closed. From where she stood, she could still see her boys, Malik and Marcus, waiting patiently. Her heart twisted. No matter how strong she had to be as a leader, right now she was just their mother. Lieutenant Harris knocked softly on the doorframe. Ma'am, the neighbor, Mrs. Whitmore, is requesting to speak with you again. Angela turned her gaze toward him, eyes calm but sharp. What could she possibly have to say after everything tonight? Harris shrugged awkwardly. She said she wants to explain, said it's all a misunderstanding, Angela took a deep breath. "Bring her in." Moments later, the station door creaked open and Mrs. Whitmore stepped in. Gone was the self-righteous confidence from earlier. Her face was pale, her hair messy, and her hands shook as she held her purse. She looked like someone who had just realized she'd burned a bridge she could never rebuild. "Chief Davis," she began softly. "I didn't know. I just thought those boys—" Angela raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Those boys are my sons. They were playing basketball outside their own home. And you thought they didn't belong there?" Mrs. Whitmore's voice cracked. I didn't mean harm. You have to understand, this neighborhood has had issues before. I just wanted to make sure." "Make sure of what?" Angela's tone sharpened, her eyes narrowing. "That your neighbors are safe from two children playing? That's what you thought was dangerous tonight?" The room went silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Harris and another officer exchanged uncomfortable glances. Angela stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you have any idea what could have happened tonight? Officers drew their weapons because of your call. My sons could have been traumatized, or worse." Tears filled the woman's eyes. "I didn't know they were yours," Angela sighed deeply. "That's the problem. You shouldn't have to know their mind to treat them with respect." The weight of her words hung heavy in the room. For the first time, Mrs. Whitmore didn't have an answer. She looked down at her shoes, trembling slightly. Angela turned to Harris. "Release her. No charges tonight, but I'll be filing a community incident report." Harris nodded. "Yes, Chief." As Mrs. Whitmore turned to leave, Angela spoke again, her tone lower but unmistakably firm. "I hope tonight teaches you something, Mrs. Whitmore. Fear can make people blind. But ignorance, that's a choice." When the woman finally left, the room exhaled a collective breath. Angela closed her office door gently and leaned against it. The weight of the uniform felt heavier than ever. She looked at a framed photo on her desk, her academy graduation picture. Back then, she'd promised herself she'd change the way her community saw law enforcement. But tonight reminded her that change doesn't just happen in the streets. It has to start in people's hearts. A soft knock broke her thoughts. "Mom!" Marcus peeked in, his eyes wide and innocent. "Can we go home now?" Angela smiled faintly, trying to hide the emotions swelling in her chest. "Yeah, baby." "We're going home." Malik joined him, holding his basketball under one arm. "Mom, are you mad?" Angela knelt, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "No, honey. I'm proud of you both. You handled yourselves better than most adults would." Marcus frowned. "But why'd she call the cops on us? We didn't do anything." Angela looked into his eyes, eyes that mirrored her own. "Sometimes people are scared of what they don't understand. But that's why we have to keep showing them who we really are. Strong, smart, and kind." "You hear me?" Both boys nodded slowly. Malik smiled. "Like you, Mom." Angela chuckled softly, wiping a tear before it fell. "Exactly like me." As they walked out together, the night air was cool, the streets quiet. The same stars that had watched their fear earlier now watched their resilience. Angela held her son's hands tightly as they crossed the parking lot. Her badge glinted under the streetlight, a symbol of authority, but also of responsibility. She knew tomorrow would bring whispers, headlines, maybe even backlash. But for tonight, she was just grateful her boys were safe. And somewhere deep inside, she vowed this wouldn't just be another incident. It would be the start of a lesson, one her community couldn't ignore any longer. The next morning dawned cold and quiet. A thin fog hugged the neighborhood, softening the sharp edges of the homes that stood in tidy rows along the street. From the Davis household, the smell of coffee filled the air as Chief Angela Davis stood by the kitchen window, staring outside with a heavy heart. The basketball lay where her boys had dropped it the night before, right on the edge of the driveway, still covered in dew. To anyone else, it might have looked like just another ball, but to Angela, it had become a reminder of how fragile safety could be, even for children in their own yard. Behind her, Malik and Marcus sat at the kitchen table, quietly eating cereal. Normally, mornings were filled with chatter, jokes, and noise, but today, the silence spoke volumes. "Mom," Marcus said softly, "are we still allowed to play outside?" Angela turned, forcing a small smile. "Of course you are, sweetheart. This is your home." Malik frowned. "What if she calls the cops again?" Angela's heart twisted. "Then the police will know better next time," she said, her tone firm but gentle. "Because now everyone knows what happened and who you are." Just then, her phone buzzed. Dozens of missed calls, text messages, and emails flooded the screen. Her name was trending on social media. Someone from the neighborhood had recorded the end of last night's confrontation. The moment Angela arrived, still in her uniform, stepping between her terrified sons and the officers, the clip had gone viral overnight. Police chief defends her black sons from racial profiling. Emotional moment caught on camera. News outlets were already requesting interviews. Her department's PR officer had left 3 voicemails. Some messages were supportive, others hateful. The entire internet had an opinion. Angela sighed and set her phone down. This wasn't how she wanted to make headlines. She poured herself another cup of coffee and sat with her boys. "You two listen," she said, her voice calm but serious. "What happened last night? It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Some people just need to learn to see the world differently." Malik looked up. "You mean like Mrs. Whitmore?" Angela nodded. "Yes, and sometimes people like her don't realize what they're doing until someone shows them." Marcus tilted his head. "You're going to show her, huh?" Angela smiled faintly. "Not just her. Everyone." At that moment, she made a decision. By noon, she was standing at the police headquarters podium, facing a small crowd of reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones pointed toward her. Her expression was steady, her uniform crisp. "I know many of you have seen the video," she began. "I won't repeat the details, but I will say this. Racial bias, no matter how small, is dangerous. It's dangerous because it hides behind fear. It disguises itself as concern. But at the end of the day, it's still discrimination." She paused, letting the words hang. "Last night, my sons were treated as suspects for simply existing in their neighborhood. As both a mother and a police officer, I cannot ignore that. We must do better. We will do better." The room went silent except for the soft clicks of cameras. Then a reporter called out, "Chief Davis, what do you plan to do about it?" Angela nodded. "Starting today, our department will host open community sessions every month. We'll discuss bias, accountability, and trust. Because change doesn't come from punishment, it comes from understanding." Another voice shouted, "And Mrs. Whitmore? Will she face charges?" Angela's eyes flickered with emotion. "No, but she will be invited to that first session. And I hope she accepts." The press conference ended, but the message spread like wildfire. Some called her brave. Others accused her of making the department look weak. But Angela didn't care. She hadn't done it for approval. She'd done it for her sons, and every child who'd ever felt afraid to just be themselves. Later that afternoon, as she returned home, she saw something unexpected. Mrs. Whitmore was standing on the sidewalk outside her house, clutching a small potted plant. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. Angela hesitated but walked toward her. Mrs. Whitmore looked up nervously. "Chief Davis, I saw your speech. I came to apologize, to you and to your boys." Angela studied her for a long moment. "Apologies are only the first step," she said quietly. "I know," Mrs. Whitmore whispered. "But I want to take that step. I was wrong. I let fear control me. I've lived here for 10 years, and I never thought about what it must feel like to be judged just for existing." Angela looked down at the plant. A peace lily. Simple, but symbolic. "Malik and Marcus are inside," Angela said. "If you really want to apologize, You can start with them. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes widened. Are you sure? Angela nodded. Everyone deserves the chance to learn, including you. As the two women walked toward the front door, Malik peeked through the curtain, eyes wide. Mom? He whispered. Is that her? Angela smiled faintly. Yes, but she's here for a different reason this time. And for the first time since last night, the tension in her chest began to ease. Maybe, just maybe, this was how change began. Not with anger, but with courage and conversation. The afternoon sun poured through the living room window, bathing everything in a soft golden light. The house was unusually quiet as Angela opened the front door and let Mrs. Whitmore step inside. The twins, Malik and Marcus, sat together on the couch, their eyes fixed on the woman who had caused all the chaos the night before. For a long moment, no one said a word. Mrs. Whitmore looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way guilt can make a person shrink. Her hands trembled as she held out the peace lily plant. I brought this, she said softly. It's not much, but I wanted to say, I'm sorry. The boys exchanged glances. Marcus frowned slightly. You called the cops on us, he said, his voice small but steady. Mrs. Whitmore nodded, her eyes glistening. I know, and I was wrong. I didn't see two kids having fun. I saw something that wasn't real, something I let my fear create. Malik tilted his head, studying her. Were you scared of us? Tears slipped down her cheeks. I wasn't scared of you. I was scared of what I didn't understand. And that's no excuse. Angela stood quietly nearby, watching the exchange unfold. Her instinct as a mother wanted to protect her boys, to shield them from this awkward, painful apology. But as a leader, and a woman who believed in growth, she knew this was an important moment. Mrs. Whitmore continued, When I saw your mom step out of that police car last night, I realized how blind I'd been. You're her sons. You live here. And still, I treated you like strangers. I can't undo that, but I can try to be better. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Malik reached forward and gently took the plant from her hands. Thank you, he said quietly. We forgive you. Marcus hesitated, then added, But you have to promise not to call the cops on us again, unless we actually do something bad. That made everyone laugh softly. Even Mrs. Whitmore. She nodded through her tears. Deal, Angela smiled faintly. That's a good start, the woman turned to Angela. Your speech today? It made me think about how many times I've judged people without realizing it. I want to attend your community sessions. I want to help, Angela nodded, her voice warm. Then we'll see you there. It takes courage to admit you were wrong. I respect that, Mrs. Whitmore smiled weakly. Thank you, Chief. She glanced back at the boys. And thank you for giving me a second chance. As the door closed behind her, Angela felt a strange mix of exhaustion and peace. The boys ran to her side, and she wrapped her arms around them both, holding them tight. Malik looked up. Mom, is everything okay now? Angela sighed softly, stroking his hair. Not everything, sweetheart, but it's getting better. That's what matters. That evening, the neighborhood felt different. People who once kept to themselves were outside, talking. A few neighbors walked over to Angela's house, offering quiet words of support. Some brought food, others just wanted to check on her and the twins. It wasn't a miracle, but it was something. Later that week, the first community session was held at the town hall. The place was packed, residents, officers, parents, and teenagers all sitting together, some with arms crossed, others curious. Some skeptical. Angela stepped up to the front of the room, her uniform neatly pressed, but her voice carrying warmth rather than authority. Thank you all for coming, she began. What happened to my sons isn't just my story. It's our story. It's a reflection of what happens when fear replaces understanding. But the fact that you're all here tonight means we can change that. Together. She looked across the crowd and saw Mrs. Whitmore sitting in the second row, nervously holding a notepad. Next to her sat an older man, who nodded thoughtfully as Angela spoke. "This isn't about blame," Angela continued. "It's about awareness, about learning to see people as people again." A man in the back raised his hand. "Chief, how do we fix something that's been broken for so long?" Angela smiled faintly. "One conversation at a time. One choice at a time. You start by saying hello instead of staring. You start by asking instead of assuming. And you start by teaching your children what fairness really means." The audience was quiet. "Listening? When I wear this uniform," she said, tapping her badge, "I'm reminded of the responsibility it carries, not just to enforce laws, but to protect trust. My goal isn't just to make arrests, it's to make change." By the time the session ended, people were talking openly, sharing stories, fears, and even laughter. It wasn't easy, but it was real. That night, Angela returned home to find her sons asleep on the couch. The TV was still on, showing a news segment about her speech. The headline read, "Local Police Chief Inspires Unity After Racial Incident. Change Begins at Home." She smiled softly, turning off the TV. For the first time in days, the silence in the house didn't feel heavy. It felt calm. She stood at the window, looking out at the street where it had all begun. The same street where fear had once lived now held the quiet promise of something new: understanding. Outside, a few neighborhood kids played basketball under the dim streetlight. She could hear the rhythmic bounce of the ball, the laughter, the joy, and for the first time, no one was calling the cops. Angela exhaled deeply, her heart full. "That's how it starts," she whispered to herself. "That's how we heal." The peace lily sat on the windowsill beside her, its leaves glowing faintly under the streetlight, a quiet symbol of forgiveness, growth, and hope.